The Straw Hat crew are once again whole, sailing towards the Grand Line. Luffy's picture has been sent off to the Navy by a corrupt Marine, and the world will soon learn his name. As the crew arrive at their final island of the East Blue, the place where Gold Roger was born and was executed, the town of beginning and the end, it's time for Oda to put an end to the East Blue, and begin to prepare us to enter the Grand Line. 6 chapters before we enter a new saga of the One Piece story, what characters will Oda introduce, what conflicts will arise, what new ideas will begin to be teased, and what is the point of East Blue? The start of a new arc, no matter how short, means a first chapter analysis. What seems to be getting set up? Well, after quickly establishing that Nami still wants money, though now for herself, and that she's bought 3 of her family's tangerine trees along on the Going Merry that Sanji protects for her, and while Usopp is creating a new projectile from hot sauce, Nami opens up a newspaper to find a cutaway to Navy headquarters. We catch a glimpse of the dominant Navy philosophy being taught at headquarters: absolute justice. We get some context on the bounties of the East Blue, as well as the bounties for Buggy, Krieg, and Arlong. Also noting that they are well above the average bounty for what Mihawk termed the weakest sea. And we get the reveal that Luffy's bounty is larger than all of them. I mentioned last time that Luffy's bounty is a result of stopping marine corruption, and now we learn his amount is defined by the enemies he has defeated. Kind of. Buggy was blowing up a town, Krieg was committing war crimes, and Arlong had an island under subjugation. It's reasonable to assume that their bounties were reflective of their terrible actions. Luffy's bounty amount is not because of any great evils he has committed, it's a preemptive amount. The Navy views pirates as evil, and in their sense of absolute justice, pirates are an absolute evil. Luffy says he is a pirate, and so he must be evil, and if he has managed to defeat these 3 evils, then he's likely to become an even greater threat himself. Luffy is, of course, thrilled with this. We learned back with Kuro that Luffy finds it ridiculous that you could become a pirate and try not to have your name be known. Additionally, Usopp is also thrilled as the back of his head has made it into Luffy's poster. And we know that Usopp wants to become a brave warrior of the sea, which in his mind is a pirate, and he's always talked himself up because he wants to be admired. Having his head appear in Luffy's poster is proof that, in his eyes, he is being recognized as a pirate. So what's the first thing this arc is going to be about? Luffy being a pirate with a bounty, becoming someone relatively known, being able to walk in and around towns without being recognized is now a thing of the past. This is reinforced by the interaction between Shanks and Mihawk, notably Shanks' dramatic line, "So you're here, Luffy." Luffy has made his entrance on the world stage with his bounty poster reveal. There is a lot more to talk about in the Shanks and Mihawk interaction, but I'll save it for the world building section. As the island comes into view, Luffy for the first time has shown an interest in seeing something that isn't related to food, and as they land, Luffy goes off to see the execution scaffold where the Pirate King died. The rest of the crew go off to do their own thing. Sanji goes for ingredients, Usopp for equipment, and Nami for something we'll find out later. But in this first chapter, we follow Zoro as he comes across a female swordsman being confronted by 2 what we can assume are pirates, since their boss is in jail and they were aiming to go to the Grand Line. She quickly dispatches them, and as Zoro gives her back her glasses, her very familiar face gives him pause. Usually this woman is seen with a monster, though that monster isn't with her right now. It's not much to go off, but getting a few extra pages dedicated to whatever Zoro is doing, which as well requires him to borrow some money from Nami, and coming across a swordsman who bears a resemblance to his deceased childhood friend, we're likely going to see some swordsman-related things this arc. And hearing about a monster, well, we can guess that that monster will soon make an appearance too. Finally, as we cut away to Luffy's hometown, Windmill Village, we see the news has spread even here, and we see some familiar faces reacting. Makino is as supportive as ever, and the mayor as grumbly as ever. And then we get an interesting line that closes the chapter. In response to Makino saying becoming a pirate was Luffy's dream, the mayor responds, his dream or his destiny. First, what do you know, old man? But also, destiny. It's an interesting word to use, and the first that I recall hearing it in this series. And the fact that a chapter was ended on it means it's likely more than a simple throwaway line. Luffy is someone defined by his love of freedom, and something like destiny could be seen as an inevitable conclusion, the opposite of freedom. We'll keep in mind that destiny has been mentioned for the rest of this arc. Since this is only 5 chapters long, let's continue chapter by chapter. First, we follow Zoro and we quickly learn that he's after a pair of new swords to replace the one shattered by Mihawk. He finds himself in a weapon shop with 100,000 berries to spend, an unimpressive amount for spending on a sword, according to the shop's owner. However, what catches Matsu's eye is Zoro's remaining sword, Kuina's sword. He attempts to swindle Zoro out of it, and when Tashigi, though we haven't yet learned her name, unintentionally intervenes, we learn several things. That swords have grades, and that Kuina's sword that Zoro now wields is one of 21 excellent grade swords called the Wado Ichimonji. This has a few interesting implications. Firstly, the fact that Kuina was the owner of such a high-grade sword, and the fact that her father allowed Zoro to take it after her death, when the sword itself is worth over 10 million berry. More interesting from a character standpoint is that Zoro, more or less, doesn't particularly know or care. He doesn't know that it's an excellent grade sword, nor does he know its name. All Zoro knows and cares about is that it's Kuina's sword, and that makes it priceless to him. When Zoro goes through the barrels of cheap swords, Tashigi points out another sword, Kitetsu III, a fine grade sword, and also, apparently, a cursed sword. Zoro shows off that, despite him not knowing anything about grades or anything like that, he can tell that it's a cursed or bewitched sword. In spite of that, Zoro takes a liking to it and tests the strength of the sword's curse against his own luck, risking his arm to prove he's worthy to be the wielder of this blade. Matsu, seeing that Zoro is a real swordsman, then brings out his shop's finest sword, yet another fine grade. There's only 40 of these things, yet this shop in the east has 2 of them. And he says an interesting line, "A sword chooses its owner." As if swords, or at least swords like these, have minds of their own. Let's throw that revelation in the chest. Zoro then leaves with 3 swords, an excellent and 2 fine grades hanging on his belt. We get one last line from Matsu. What's wrong with a man entrusting another man with his dreams? Matsu's not that significant a character, but in the same way Zoro has entrusted himself with Kuina's dream when he took her sword, Zoro has now taken on Matsu's dream, not knowing what that may be, when he received his finest sword too. In amongst all this talk of swords, we hear what this monster that Tashigi works under is. A devil fruit user called Captain Smoker. Tashigi already expressed that pirates are evil, so he's not a captain in that sense. Rather, he is a marine, and the first devil fruit user we've heard of since Buggy. And as we close out the chapter, we finally get Tashigi's name. But more interestingly, we see that woman with a familiar hat from Buggy's cover story. And you know what that means, Buggy should be here too. The next chapter begins and we catch up with the other Straw Hats. Sanji is getting some seafood, Usopp is getting some cheap eggs, and Nami, likely for the first time in a long time, spends some money on herself. Last chapter she was trying on some fine clothes, though not buying any, and this chapter buying a stack of regular clothes for herself. I do want to point it out explicitly, since last arc Arlong said he looks after Nami and will even buy her all the beautiful clothes that she wants, but now she's reclaiming even this portion of her life back from him, buying her own clothes and rejecting the beautiful ones that Arlong likely would have purchased for her. Of course, some tension is brought into the arc as Nami, showing off her skill with the weather for what I think is the first time since her introduction, notices a change in the air and predicts that a storm is on its way. Then we see Luffy, bold as ever, standing atop the execution scaffold, thinking about how this was the last thing the Pirate King saw before his execution, which again, it's interesting to see that Luffy holds a bit of reverence for someone he's never met. Then the lady with a familiar hat swings a familiar weapon and greets Luffy. I'll skip to the chase. It's Alvida, a very different looking Alvida, that's to be sure. Heck, she must be beautiful if even Luffy acknowledges it, just as bluntly as he acknowledged her last time. Everyone else is, however, taken by Alvida's beauty, men and women alike. It's important to note that Luffy isn't. His utter non-reaction to what is apparently a stunning beauty, that should be thrown in the chest too. Alvida's transformation is due to her consuming a devil fruit, the Slip fruit, an ability that causes things to slip right off her, as demonstrated when a large piece of rubble launched directly towards her seems to almost slide past her. The fact that the devil fruit has radically altered her appearance is certainly something of note. It's the first time we've seen it, albeit it's the third devil fruit we've ever seen. Also, I feel like it's worth pointing out that Luffy's first 2 pirate antagonists now both have the power of the devil fruit. I just find that neat. Then the man of the hour appears, the showman, the legend, the clown, rocking a new face paint design. Kabaji then appears from literally nowhere, locking Luffy into place on the execution scaffold. Literally, where did this come from? We cut once more to Smoker as we get a proper introduction to his character. His face shadowed, his men intimidated. This is our third Navy captain we've been introduced to, and if Axehand Morgan and Nezumi are anything to go by, surely this captain will also be rotten to the core. Except, he's not. Much like with Zoro's introduction, where everyone around him was calling him a demon, treating him as if he were some great evil, when a small girl runs into Smoker and stains his pants with ice cream, though the girl's father reacts like the members of Shellstown, Smoker is kind. He pats her head, or I guess puts his hand gently on her head, and crouches down so he can communicate with the girl at eye level. He apologizes even though he did nothing wrong. He says something quite cute, "My pants ate up all your ice cream." I mean, that's so cute, and a thoughtful way to communicate with a young child. Then he gives the girl some money to get 5 scoops of ice cream to make her feel better for losing 3, showing a degree of generosity. Unlike the 2 captains before him who didn't give a damn about the villagers under their purview, or even took advantage of them, and in Morgan's case was more than happy to have a little girl killed for disobeying him, Smoker, despite his intimidating demeanor and rough way of communicating with his subordinates, is a good guy that cares about the civilians under his jurisdiction. Toshigi wasn't wrong when she said Smoker was not a monster. He's just an honest marine that cares about people, and efficiently does his job of taking down pirates, which is why Matsu was complaining that less bad guys were coming into his shop. The Straw Hats, sans Luffy, meet up with one another and quickly learn that Luffy is on the execution scaffold, and Smoker gets informed of his targets and informed of the size of Luffy's bounty. Yep, while previously he may have gone under the radar, heck, maybe in this situation Smoker may have attempted to save them if he didn't have a bounty. Those days are over. As the first chapter implied, Luffy now has a bounty, he's officially a pirate in the eyes of the world, and there are consequences to that. Next chapter, which starts with a line from a disembodied narrator. Legends that endure in the future were events that took place in the distant past. I won't throw it in the chest, but if anyone is up to date with One Piece, that line certainly hits a bit different now, eh? Buggy is about to execute Luffy in grand style, still ever the showman, and Usopp and Nami race back to the ship as Nami explains a massive storm is about to hit. Lion Tamer Moji has also made his way to the Going Merry, preparing to burn it. Smoker shows his cool head as he waits to let the situation with Buggy and Luffy resolve before stepping in to capture whoever remains. Buggy tells Luffy to say his last words, and Luffy booms out confidently that he is going to be king of the pirates, even in this position. He calls out to Zoro and Sanji for help, as the emotional wing and the stoic, thank you Carl, wing of the future Pirate King are united in their goal to bring down the execution platform. As Buggy brings the sword down, Luffy calls out to his 4 crew members by name. Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, and Nami, and with a beaming smile on his face, he apologizes. He's a goner. While Zoro and Sanji react in horror, Smoker reacts in a different sort of horror. He laughed. A lightning bolt hits the execution platform, bringing it down, as well as Buggy, in flames. Luffy picks up his hat and bluntly comments, "I'm alive, lucky me." And, hang on, Luffy's clothes and skin are a little seared from the flames of the execution platform, but Buggy is scorched. The fact that the lightning didn't affect Luffy? Let's throw that in the chest. Sanji, of course, reacts emotionally, thinking that such an occurrence must be a result of a higher power. Zoro, skeptical of such things, says that that's nonsense. Then the 3 of them skedaddle. Then we find out the reason for Smoker's reaction. The last person to laugh at their execution was the Pirate King 22 years ago. According to the Marine soldier, every man trembles in fear of certain death, but not Luffy and Roger. Let's throw that in the chest as well. As the storm has caused Marines to leave the port unprotected, and as the same storm provides tailwind for an escape, much like Sanji, Smoker thinks, it's as though some kind of force is willing this man's survival. Just like the mayor in the opening chapter of this arc, is it Luffy's dream to become a pirate, or his destiny? Then we've reached the final chapter, chapter 100, bearing the title The Legend Begins, and rather than the musings of a nameless narrator, we get a quote from the King of the Pirates. "These things cannot be stopped, an inherited strength of will, one's dreams, the ebb and flow of the ages. As long as people hunger for freedom, these things will exist." Along with this quote is an unfamiliar man with a face tattoo, smiling and saying, "A pirate, eh? Not a bad idea." It's important to note that this is the second thing we've ever heard Gold Roger say, and the last thing he said started the Great Pirate Era, so let's break it down. There's a familiar concept in this quote: dreams. Dreams have been a big part of the story so far, with each of our characters having a dream that they are pursuing. The ebb and flow of the ages is interesting to mention, but it hasn't been something that has really been mentioned before, beyond the fact that the story is taking place in an age of piracy. Knowing what we know now 1,000 chapters later, this quote takes on whole new meaning, but the seed of that meaning is planted here. An inherited strength of will. This is another thing that hasn't yet been explicitly mentioned, but is a core theme of One Piece in the future. We've seen glimpses of inherited will, Zeph saving Sanji because they had the same dream, and now Sanji has taken on his will in pursuit of the All Blue. Zoro inherited both Kuina's sword and along with it her will to become the world's greatest swordsman, not to mention his interaction with Matsu and taking on his dream, albeit unknowingly as well. Again, it's another thing introduced here for the first time that will take on new meaning later on in the story. As long as people hunger for freedom, these things will exist. Well, we know from Chapter 1 that pirates are all about freedom, or at least the type of pirate that Luffy wants to be. So, for some, and fittingly for a quote from the Pirate King, it implies that piracy will never stop as long as people want to follow their dreams and be free. Either way, let's put this whole quote in the chest. Let's get on to this final chapter. First, we see Buggy and Alvida starting their unconventional pursuit using the devil fruits in creative ways. But then we get the reveal of Smoker's devil fruit, the Plume fruit, which appears to give Smoker control over smoke. He is even able to turn his body into smoke. Though Alvida could make a giant piece of rubble fly off of her, even she's powerless against this new devil fruit power. We see Buggy and Alvida in a net, and Buggy seems to know what it is, a prison bullet, made to use against devil fruit people, and now we're just common criminals. So it looks like there's something that can counteract devil fruit that the Navy has a supply of. Following on with the idea of fate, we see that the sudden storm has stopped Moji from burning down the ship, and the power of Usopp's shaky legs causes the animal tamer to knock himself out. Then Usopp uses one of his freshly purchased eggs to... he uncharacteristically misses his target, but it distracts Richie the lion regardless. Zoro comes face to face with Tashigi, the pair now knowing who each other are, and Sanji reacts poorly to Zoro getting into a fight with a woman. We've never seen Sanji react to someone fighting a woman before, but needless to say, he's not a fan. Looks like something we'll have to throw in the chest. Zoro handily defeats Tashigi, and he finally reveals that, yes, Tashigi reminds him very much of Kuina, and because of it, Zoro acts uncharacteristically emotional when talking to her. I think it goes to show that Zoro can't think rationally when it comes to Kuina, that the girl he made that promise to all those years ago means far more to him than just a memory. But enough of the couple's quarrel. Smoker confronts Luffy, and we see more of what his devil fruit can do as his body turns to smoke, making him immune to Sanji and Luffy's blows. It's different from Buggy's immunity to blades, Luffy's immunity to blunt blows, and whatever it is that Alvida did. Smoker is able to turn his body into smoke either partially or entirely, seemingly without any restriction. And Luffy is absolutely powerless against this ability. Smoker may be a captain, same as Morgan and Nezumi, but he's by far the most powerful opponent Luffy has faced thus far. All hope seems lost as Smoker draws his weapon to presumably finish off Luffy, until that man from the start of the chapter appears once more. Smoker recognizes him, and Luffy, conveniently, does not see him. He then says a very cryptic line, "The world is waiting for our answer," and who on earth knows what that means? Someone shouts, "Wind blast!" I'll note that it doesn't look like the man, his mouth is closed in this panel, which blows Luffy and the Marines, aside from Smoker, away. As the monster trio make their escape, the man comments once more, "Go ahead if that's your way." Then Smoker asks the man why he's helping Luffy, and as he does, reveals the man's name, Dragon. Dragon responds cryptically yet again, saying he's got no reason to interfere with another man's voyage. Dragon is a man of mystery. He says seemingly nonsensical lines, but we know two things for sure: that the government is after him, and that he seems to have an interest in Luffy. In regards to his interest in Luffy, he talks as if he is gratified by Luffy's decision to become a pirate, that he is pleased that Luffy has chosen this path, but also that he doesn't wish to restrain Luffy. Indeed, by stopping Smoker, Dragon has granted Luffy freedom to continue his journey, though once again we have to think back to the mayor. If someone like this appears to be watching out for Luffy, could it be destiny that things turned out this way? As Luffy and co get back to the Merry, we see that Smoker isn't called White Chase for no reason, as he has decided to pursue Luffy. It's not just that Luffy has managed to get away, but Smoker sees Luffy as a far greater threat than his current bounty may imply. Someone like that, like the Pirate King, could smile in the face of death? Such a pirate cannot be allowed to roam free. Tashigi also wants to join him as she wishes to capture Zoro. Now, here's another thing that is important about Smoker. As a Marine warns him that the Grand Line is outside of Smoker's jurisdiction, what does Smoker say? "You don't tell me what to do." This is another case of the meaning of a panel getting lost in the coolness of a panel. Yes, this is very cool. Smoker is getting set up as a great antagonist to Luffy, but we need to remember something. The Marines as we've seen so far are all about hierarchy. Morgan defined his superiority by his rank, and Nezumi had power because the Marines under him followed his orders without question. With this line, Smoker, the first morally upright captain that appears to care about civilians, establishes that he does not care about the hierarchy. He'll fulfill the obligations of his station, but because he cares about innocent people, he won't follow orders if it means putting innocent people at risk. We know Luffy wouldn't just go around murdering and pillaging, but Smoker doesn't know that. He's bought into, for one reason or another, the Marine idea of all pirates are evil and must be destroyed. So when he sees the potential for Luffy to become another king of the pirates, that evil must be stopped. What his superiors say, what the hierarchy commands, be damned. Who else decides to follow Luffy? The great Captain Buggy, of course, and we get a full confirmation that, indeed, Buggy has been to the Grand Line before. It was heavily implied when we first met him, but now it is clear. In our final scene of this mini-arc, while the storm rages about them, Nami lets the crew know that a lighthouse that they see is an indicator that they are approaching the entrance to the Grand Line. Sanji pulls over a barrel and the crew states their dreams, except for Luffy, that tease. Based on the translation, I'm not sure how they knew what they were doing here, though I suppose Sanji initiated the ceremony for lack of a better term, and the fact that he acts as though this is what you're supposed to do when you're about to enter the Grand Line makes me think that it's another thing he's learned from Zeph. So at the end of chapter 100, we hear the crew's dreams and goals plainly. Sanji is going to find the All Blue, Luffy is going to be king of the pirates, Zoro is going to be the world's greatest swordsman, Nami is going to draw a map of the world, and Usopp is going to become a brave warrior of the sea. With the guiding light pointing towards their destination, the crew prepares to enter the Grand Line. That was a lot of stuff, and the ride doesn't stop here. It's time to get into the world building, and let me say that for a 5-chapter mini-arc, 100 chapters into the manga, there is so much that is introduced and expanded upon. So in no particular order, and in relative rapid fire, how is the world expanded with these 5 chapters? There are newspapers delivered by Bird. And not only is it a bird, it's a sentient bird. It seems to understand language. It also wears a cute hat. We haven't seen any animals wearing clothing before this point, so it's just another thing to make note of. It's also a clever way to explain how people around the world, and especially the Straw Hats, can keep up to date with events, even if they're in the middle of the ocean. We get our first proper naming of the government, the World Government. Previously, everything was labeled as Marines. Yosaku mentions government-sanctioned pirates, but he's never used the phrase world government, which left it a bit ambiguous. It's only in the context of under direct control of the world government, letting us know that the Navy is part of the world government, but is not itself the world government. Also, it's interesting that the execution scaffold is under the jurisdiction of the world government and not the Navy. The coup d'etat in Vera. This implies that while the government is a world government, perhaps their control over the world isn't as solid as they'd like, that certain places aren't so satisfied with their governance. I literally don't know if the coup d'etat in Vera is specifically important, but I'll throw it in the chest anyway. If you know, you know. It may literally just be mentioned because, spoilers, Dragon is a revolutionary, and mentioning Vera could be a hint in that direction. We get a more detailed look at pirate bounties and the bounties of the East Blue. We see the East Blue average reward is 3 million. We get the bounties of Buggy, Krieg, and Arlong, seeing that they're over 5 times the average. And Luffy is at 30 million. Also worth noting is that Higuma, the bandit from the first chapter, had a bounty of 8 million, so while his bounty may have been less than Buggy and co., it was still above the average for the East Blue. We get our first look at Navy headquarters. First we see the dogma, the justification for their actions. And note, there is nothing about protecting the citizens. Yes, they mentioned it's not the fault of citizens if they fall prey to cutthroats, but the dogma is all about crushing pirates. in the name of absolute justice. I've mentioned forms of justice previously as a concept, but this is the first time we're explicitly hearing a type of justice named, and it's the type being preached at headquarters. Finally, the scale. We've only seen Captain Rank so far wearing this sort of outfit, sans the justice written on the back, and we're seeing rows and rows of them here. The meeting between Shanks and Mihawk tells us a lot in brief 3 pages. We can infer that they've fought before. Shanks assumes that Mihawk is here to challenge him, which means that this isn't the first time. Though since Mihawk says he doesn't challenge one-armed has-beens, they haven't fought since Shanks lost his arm. Shanks and Mihawk have known each other for a long while, since even if they haven't fought since Shanks lost his arm, he's known Mihawk before then and been familiar enough to see him afterwards. The fact that Shanks thinks Mihawk is here to challenge him means 2 things. Shanks views himself as someone Mihawk would challenge, which means he sees himself on par with the greatest swordsman in the world. And we know that Shanks uses a sword, so by extension, his sword skills are almost certainly going to be top tier. Shanks remembers Luffy fondly. He seemed to be in a bad mood initially, though it appears though that was due to a hangover, which shows us Shanks is still the hearty, boozing, partying type. But when he hears about Luffy starting to make a name for himself as a pirate, he calls for further celebration. He even calls Mihawk to drink with him, showing that he's still friendly with hostile parties. Swords and sword grades. Swords can, apparently, have grades: supreme, excellent, and fine. Not all swords have grades, but graded swords are limited in number: 12 supreme, 21 excellent, and 40 fine grade. Swords apparently have minds of their own, or at least they can choose their wielder. As an extension of that, they can also be cursed and bring misfortune to their wielders. And Zoro's new Kitetsu sword is the 3rd of 3, with its predecessors being excellent and supreme grade swords. Now, the fact that this was explicitly mentioned means I just have to throw that info into the chest, but it also shows that swords can be related to one another. We get introduced to something that can cancel out a Devil Fruit's abilities that the government has control over. We learn that, bluntly, marine ranks are not an indicator of marine strength. It's not completely separate. You can assume that a higher rank is stronger than a lower rank, and most of the time you'll probably be correct. But there's a power gap between Smoker and Axe-Hand Morgan, and an even larger gap between the 2 of them and Nezumi. So just because we see a marine of a certain rank does not mean that we can take them for granted. On a meta level, we learn something that is actually crucial for One Piece's success: that the world keeps going on without the Straw Hats' involvement. And this is shown through the fact that Buggy's cover story has consequences, that his adventure actually happened, that he met Alvida during it, and they had wound up here in pursuit of Luffy. This changes One Piece from a villain of the week story into a cohesive world. Buggy's cover story ended a little bit into Arlong Park, over 20 weeks before, in real time, this arc started, and now he appears again, and it seems as though he, along with Alvida, as well as Smoker, will be following Luffy into the future. Speaking of which, there's one thing I haven't mentioned yet: Koby's cover story. I wonder if it was planned that at the climax of Koby's cover story, him disobeying orders to risk his life in order to protect Helmeppo was to coincide with Smoker's reveal. I wouldn't be surprised as we're seeing a similar trait in the 2 of them. The 2 most morally upstanding Marines we've met disobey orders to protect others. It's also good to see that Koby, now in the Marines, hasn't bent to the propaganda and is still true to his beliefs. We also see Helmeppo's turnaround. The brat living off his father's name gets changed by the sincerity of Koby, and impressed by their attitude, this new character, the highest ranking Marine we've seen so far, Vice Admiral Garp, takes the 2 boys under his wing. Now that we know these cover stories mean something, that the world keeps going even while the Straw Hats aren't around, since Buggy has shown back up, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Koby, Helmeppo, and this Garp fella in the future. Let's get our themes ironed out, and frankly, Roguetown bucks the trend of themes of the East Blue, and for good reason. It's preparing us for what is to come. We get an exploration into what it means to be a swordsman, with a focus on the relationship between swordsmen and their blades. We hear mention of the first time of destiny, and for sure several things happen to go exactly right for Luffy to be able to continue his journey. Gold Roger's speech mentions other themes that will become relevant later in the story: inherited will, the ebb and flow of the ages, that people yearn for freedom. We do get one of our old themes addressed, what it means to be a pirate. Well, now that Luffy has a bounty, he's getting the full pirate treatment. He's now a wanted man, and he's now getting pursued by the Marines. And devastatingly, we do not see a Luffy liberation loop this arc, though funnily enough, we do see a Luffy getting liberated. Indeed, it is Dragon that does the liberating this time, freeing the captured Luffy from Smoker, which allows Luffy to continue pursuing his dreams. I don't think it's a coincidence that in Dragon's introduction, we see him freeing someone. And as this short arc comes to a close, there is only one chapter left. One chapter where the Going Merry and the Straw Hat crew are sailing on the waters of the East Blue, and one more video to complete this series. Indeed, next part, the finale of The Point of East Blue, we're going to look back on everything we've learned this series, how Oda used these first 101 chapters to set up one of the greatest fantasy stories of all time. We're going to find out the real Point of East Blue. And I hope you join me, because it's not I attempt new things, it's we attempt new things. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a fruitful day.